So in this chapter, we're going to take a look at how your body responds to foreign invaders. What is your immune response? How does it try to get rid of that foreign invader that's in there? So some of the things that we're going to talk about in this chapter, we're going to talk about how our body tries to prevent different microbes from getting in. We're going to talk about the first line of defense, the second line of defense, which are both part of your innate immune system, which means they're not specific. They're for kind of any foreign invader that got in the body. And then we'll just kind of briefly talk a little bit about it because this is going to be the next chapter. The acquired immunity, the fact that it can recognize very specific invaders in the body and tackle them in its own specific manner. This chapter is mostly focusing on these first two lines of defense, the non-specific way our immune system can react to foreign invaders. We're going to talk about what are non-specific defenses, how do we get the different defenses that we have. We're going to talk about some of the cells that are involved. We're going to talk about white blood cells, regular, a little bit about red blood cells, but mostly white blood cells, how they act, different processes such as inflammation, phagocytosis, different type of chemicals that are used. So just lots of different ways that our body prevents things from getting in, and how does it tackle them in a non-specific manner, just any foreign invader that gets in. So again, we group our two types of immune system as innate and adaptive. Anything in our innate immune system, innate means born with. Your body was born knowing how to recognize different things and how to try to tackle them. So they're not specific. It's any foreign invader that gets in the body. It knows it's not supposed to be there. And we divide our innate immune system into the first two lines of defense, our first and our second, which we're going to tackle in this chapter. Our adaptive immunity recognizes very specific invaders, and we're not born with it. So this is where we get some of that learned immunity when we start to become immune to things, is that it recognizes something, it tackles it, it gets rid of it, and it now has memory. So when it recognizes and sees the same thing it's seen before, it can get rid of it before it becomes an issue. That's chapter 15. So just some of the defense mechanisms of us, things that we have. Again, our defense is to try to prevent things from getting in the body, and then if and when they do, to get rid of them as fast as possible. So our first line of defense is anything that just prevents that organism from getting in. So it just blocks anything from getting in. The second line of defense is, well, it got in, but what are some different types of cells, fluids, or processes that our body can do to try to get rid of that foreign invader? All non-specific, so kind of any random foreign invader that got in. The third line of defense, this is acquired, so once you're exposed to something, it tackles it, it gets rid of it, and it creates those memory cells. Now, the lines of defense do not work separately from each other. Instead, they generally overlap, they're redundant, so as one thing is helping, so is another layer as well. They all try to work together to recognize foreign invaders and get rid of them. Now, our first line of defense, it's anything that's just trying to prevent something from getting in the body. Now, we divide this into three categories: any type of physical or anatomical barrier to prevent something from getting in, different types of chemicals that we have that prevent things from getting in, and even some genetic resistance that can block infections. Again, they can block the entry of not only microbes that we talk about in this class, but any foreign agent, some type of dust, any type of dirt, they are there to recognize any foreign object. So one big physical or anatomical barrier that we have to prevent things from getting in is our skin. And it's because our skin has a whole bunch of layers of cells. They all contain the keratin protein. They're all stuck together. And so it in itself is a great shield against something getting in. Not only does it have all these layers of dead skin cells, they are shed. So as microbes are trying to get in, as your cells are shedding the cells, or as the skin is shedding cells, it can be shedding the pathogen as well. Sweat is also related to our skin. Sweat, just that flushing effect. As that liquid comes off, some of the microbes come off with it. But your sweat also has salt. Most bacteria don't like salt. Again, that changes the osmotic gradient. They don't like salt, and so that salt actually can inhibit a lot of microorganisms. Not all, but a lot of microorganisms. Our sweat contains some antimicrobial proteins that can inhibit microbial growth, and they can even contain enzymes called a lysozyme that can inhibit or stop bacterial growth. Our skin also has sebum. It's that oily substance. It has a lower pH that can inhibit microbes from growing, but that sebum, that oil, also keeps our skin kind of soft and pliable, which is good because if it's soft and pliable, you can stretch your skin. It's not going to break, which provides a great wall or barrier from allowing microbes to get in. When your skin becomes dry, say middle of winter, overuse of different types of hand sanitizer, your skin becomes dry, it can crack. And unfortunately, anytime you get a crack, you've just broken your first line of defense and microbes could potentially get in. Now, the mucous membrane is also part of that first line physical barrier. And your mucous membrane, anything that lines any surfaces that are exposed to the outside. So your respiratory tract, digestive tract. And they produced fluids. So blinking and tear production can try to decrease microbes from getting in your eyes. Saliva can decrease microbes from growing and getting in the body. The fact that it just makes a mucus, the mucus can trap microbes. Your respiratory tract also has cilia that lines the respiratory tract that also is there to try to trap particles to prevent them from getting in into the body itself. And so I'm like, all things just to prevent from getting in, physical or anatomical barriers. We also do have some chemicals that prevent lysozyme, which is found in sweat, as well as in some sebum. It's just an enzyme that breaks down bacteria cell walls, so it inhibits bacteria. And defensids, which are peptides also found in sweat and sebum that can lyse bacteria, break bacteria and fungi apart. Again, just because we have these doesn't mean, oh, we'll never get anything in. They do their best. Things can still get across. Some other chemical defenses, we have that strong acid found in our stomach that kills a lot of microbes. We have digestive juices and bile found in the intestines that kill and inhibit a lot of microbes. Semen contains an antimicrobial chemical because we don't want it to be infected. And the vagina also has an acidic pH that inhibits microbes from growing. Now, the third kind of first line of defense is that there are some genetic defenses. There are some hosts that are genetically immune to diseases of other hosts. An example, cats or dogs can get distemper. Humans can't. You can't get distemper from your cat because they sneezed on you. That is a host-specific disease. Just like if you had mumps or measles and you coughed on your pet, they're not going to get mumps or measles. So I'm like, there are genetic differences between different hosts that allow you to be immune to certain types of diseases. Viruses have a very specific or a great specificity for a host. That's why I'm like, there are lots of viruses that affect other animals. There's lots of viruses that affect plants. I'm like, we're not the right host, so a lot of viruses can infect us. And there are some unique genetic differences that different humans can have that can make them immune to different disorders. An example, if you carry a gene or genes for sickle cell anemia, which is unfortunate, the benefit right back though is you are resistant to malaria. Doesn't mean you for sure can't get it, but you have a lower chance. And so a genetic difference can make you more resistant to certain diseases. Pretty rare, but there are some of those unique examples. Now, my little concept check I have on here. Which of these is not an example of the immune system first line of defense? I'm like, and the answer is inflammation. Inflammation we haven't gotten to yet. That's a process. Everything else has been a chemical or some type of structural defense. The sneeze reflex comes from that cilia, that it's picking up different things. It's all there to prevent things from getting in physically. Now, structure, looking at some of the different parts of the immune system. So immunology is really studying the body's second and third line of defense. It's once something has gotten in the body. The first line is just to prevent things from getting in. Second and third is what do we do about it? So that's all immunology. Now, the functions of the immune system is to constantly be patrolling the body, looking for any foreign invaders. But it also has to be able to recognize what a foreign invader is versus what a normal cell is, so that we don't start attacking our own immune system. And when it does recognize something foreign, that it can attack it and hopefully destroy it, and to get rid of it from the body. Now, the main cells that are going to be doing this, that are constantly patrolling the body, are your white blood cells, also called your leukocytes. They're the ones that are there to constantly be recognizing foreign materials or non-self cells versus a self cell. That is a normal cell in the body. It's one of your cells, and it's a healthy cell, which means it doesn't have a virus in it. Now, one of the things that helps those white blood cells do that is white blood cells have on them something called a pathogen recognition receptor. So these are receptors on the white blood cells. So on the white blood cells, they have these little pattern recognition receptors. And those receptors on the white blood cell are constantly patrolling for pathogen-associated patterns, PAMPs. These are any molecules that are shared by microorganisms. An example, peptidoglycan found on bacterial cell walls. That's not any kind of molecule, those NAMs and NAGs, that any of our cells have. So that is something very unique shared by a lot of bacteria. And so the white blood cells are constantly, with their receptors, patrolling for those NAMs and NAGs found in peptidoglycan. They can then recognize it and target that for destruction. So they're looking for anything unique. Most flagella, the only cell in the human body that has flagella is sperm, and that flagella is structurally different than a bacteria flagella. And so a bacteria flagella is going to have its own unique molecule shape that our white blood cells are trying to recognize and target those things for destruction. Now, the immune system itself, it's a large, complex network of cells and fluids that is patrolling the entire body. And it has to, because you can get microbes into the body in so many different places, so your immune system has to constantly be patrolling all the organs, all the tissues, looking for foreign invaders. And then once it recognizes that, it has to kind of communicate that information to other parts of the body. So we're constantly looking for anything that's in the body, and using the lymphatic system, using your circulatory system, it's bringing information to different parts of the body that there's foreign invaders, kind of bringing recruits in. So everything has to talk. So when we talk about the lymphatic system, other than talking about lymph, which is coming up, we do have to talk about blood. And I'm like, it is one of the things that's constantly recognizing, or where things are constantly coming from to recognize foreign invaders. And it transports a lot of different things. So whole blood is just made up of plasma and formed elements. That's all the cells. But when we talk about plasma, we also usually talk about serum. Plasma is mostly water. If you've ever donated plasma, because you can do that in Alaska, make some good money. I'm like, it's not the water they want. They can get water. And I'm like, what they're looking for is some of the other stuff that's in there. Other certain specific proteins, possibly clotting factors, possibly hormones. And I'm like, that's what they're looking for in plasma. But we a lot of times also talk about serum. Serum is the liquid portion of blood. It's the plasma minus the clotting factors. So a lot of times if you're giving your patients fluids, you would rather give them serum. You don't want any additional clotting to happen, especially after a surgery when they're already at a higher risk for clotting. So I'm like, they're slightly different from each other. Serum is just pretty much plasma without the clotting factors. But the other part of blood are those formed elements, the cells that we can find in there. Now, all of the cells in blood are all made through a process called hemopoiesis or hematopoiesis. Just means making of blood. Your erythrocytes are better known as your red blood cells. Their main job is to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide, but without them, we wouldn't live, so they're still part of every system in the body. The platelets' main job is for clotting, which again can prevent fluids and things from getting out of the body, which could also be a potential entry site. So we would like blood vessels to clot. And then leukocytes, these are your white blood cells. These are your defending cells. There are 5 of them that we're going to talk about. Now, of the 5, we group them into 2 groups. We group them into granulocytes and agranulocytes. Just means that when we stain them, do they have dark staining granules in them, or is their cytoplasm very pale? It's just how we group the 2. This is just showing that our red blood cells, platelets, are 5 different white blood cells. They all come from the process hematopoiesis. They all come from stem cells and then differentiate. And even some of the white blood cells can differentiate. There's more than one kind of lymphocyte. And but we'll get into that in chapter 15. Now, the granulocytes. I said we group them into granulocytes and agranulocytes. The granulocytes, again, they all have dark staining granules. You can see it in the cytoplasm. There are 3 of them out of the 5, the neutrophils, the eosinophils, and the basophils. And if you notice, they all end in "phil." Now, the neutrophils and the basophils, the neutrophils, one of their main jobs is to phagocytize different types of foreign invaders, and we'll get to phagocytosis, but it's a big phagocyte. And out of the 5 white blood cells, it is by far the most predominant one. Somewhere between 55 and 90% of all white blood cells are neutrophils. Eosinophils, there's not a lot of them. Their job is to destroy eukaryotic pathogens. So these are not the cells that are looking for bacteria or even viruses. Eosinophils are really trying to target parasitic worms, if you have a worm infection, or some type of fungal infection. So that's when we usually see eosinophils numbers go up. Basophils, they release other types of chemical mediators that help try to target and get rid of some type of foreign invader. Now, the agranulocytes, there's 2 of them, and they don't end in "phil," they both end in "cyte." So the lymphocytes and the monocytes. The lymphocytes, there's still quite a few of them. There are specific immune response that we're going to talk more about in chapter 15. But there are 2 types of lymphocytes. There are B lymphocytes, called B cells, and T lymphocytes, which we call T cells. Their job, again, they are looking for very specific foreign invaders, and they're going to do their job to try to get rid of them. B cells are going to produce antibodies to get rid of them. T cells, they've got different kinds of functions, but it's mostly just to directly kill foreign invaders. The other type of agranulocyte is the monocyte. It's the largest in size of all the white blood cells. They usually have kind of a horseshoe or kidney bean nucleus that's in there. And they are big macrophages. Macrophage means big eater. They are a big phagocytic cell. They also can form what's known as a dendritic type of cell. Now, it's not dendrites like in the nervous system, but it's dendritic because it does have extensions on the outside. If I can go back to the picture. Now, so it has extensions on the outside that, again, is trying to recognize foreign invaders with all those long extensions out there and target it for destruction, usually through some type of phagocytosis. Again, it can trap things really, really easily with all of those different extensions. Now, the whole lymphatic system, it is constantly surveying, recognizing, and trying to get rid of foreign materials. And it works together with the circulatory system to constantly just be, patrolling everything, getting information everywhere in the body. Now, the fluid found in the lymphatic system, which is your immune system, is called lymph. It's a plasma-like fluid, which makes sense because it comes from the circulatory system. So lymphatic vessels are generally located pretty close to your circulatory vessels. And so when fluid leaves the blood vessels into that interstitial fluid, a lot of that fluid then goes into the lymphatic vessels. And so it's going to have a composition very much like the plasma from where it came from. Now, the fluid's job, again, it's mostly water, but it does have some different proteins, different salts, and it's to transport foreign materials. It's going to transport white blood vessels. It's going to transport any of those infectious agents, cellular debris, but it's there to help transport different things to get it to different parts of the body. Now, the lymphatic capillaries. which they are going to be the smallest. Again, they are generally located very close to blood capillaries. Their function is just to return lymph in a one direction flow toward the heart, and then eventually return anything else to the bloodstream. And again, they follow right next to each other. Now, Mike, that we're constantly patrolling the bloodstream, we're constantly patrolling the body. Now, in your lymphatic system, we have what we call primary organs, and we have secondary organs. The primary organs is where the cells, your lymphocytes, are made and where they mature. So it's just where those lymphocytes are made and mature. And the two primary organs are the thymus gland and the bone marrow, specifically your red bone marrow. So these are where you get your two types of lymphocytes, your T cells and your B cells. Named for the T cells is because they mature in the thymus, and the B cells is because they mature in the bone marrow, specifically the red bone marrow. Now the thymus gland, interesting enough, is as you get older, the thymus gland right there by your heart does actually start to get a little smaller. Still does its job, now Mike, but it does start to shrink as you get older. Now your secondary organs is where you're going to have a larger congregation of different types of cells. So it's a circulatory based location. It's just where you have a large number, a big grouping of cells, a big grouping of that lymph. And your lymph nodes and your spleen are examples of these secondary organs or tissues. Now, some of the most accessible lymph nodes are the ones in your neck, which is all the time when you go to the doctor, they're always feeling the lymph nodes in your neck. You also have some very predominant lymph nodes in your groin and in your armpit. That, again, it's just a large section of some of this lymphatic tissue. Now, collections of cells, we do have cells that are patrolling all over the body for the foreign invader, but we do have a few areas where we also have a higher congregation of these patrolling cells. There's the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, the skin-associated lymphoid tissue, and your gut-associated lymphoid tissue. We generally try to put a lot of this type of tissue where we think there's a higher risk of a foreign invader. An example, your gut-associated lymphatic tissue, also known as Peyer's patches, you get a lot of bacteria in your digestive tract. A lot. Again, almost half and half of what's in your fecal matter is bacteria, which means that's a high-risk area. There's so many bacteria, it's such a high risk to pick up some type of foreign invader there. So we have tissue that's located right there with a higher concentration of these cells that are looking for any foreign invaders that have started to get across. So we are just positioning these types of tissues in high-risk areas. Now, my little concept track question I have in here is, where do T cells mature? Well, they're called T cells for a reason, is because they mature in the thymus. Now, the second line of defense. One, again, it's any kind of cell or process or chemical that is there to try to get rid of something that got in the body. So we've talked about some of the cells already, and we'll talk about some of them more because they're involved in some of these processes. But we're going to get into some of the processes. So these are all mechanisms that play roles in host defense. Again, we have to have recognition of foreign invaders. Inflammation, that we're going to talk about next, is a big mechanism that plays a role in defense. Phagocytosis is another big one. We're going to talk coming up about how interferons help and how complement proteins help. Again, they do interact with each other though. They generally, if you can all work together, you accomplish more. It's the same as with the immune system. Now, in inflammation, there are kind of 4 key signs and symptoms of inflammation happening. There's usually a redness associated, and that redness is usually because your blood vessels have dilated. They've gotten larger, and so you're more easily able to see the blood vessels, and that's where the redness comes from. The warmth is because you do have an increase of blood flow to that particular area, and you're feeling the heat from that 98.6 degree internal temperature. The swelling is because you have an increase of fluid in your tissue, because you have fluid leaking out of blood vessels into other tissues. And then pain, because there is usually some type of stimulation to your nerve endings causing the pain. Now, just kind of the 4-step process of what's happening to cause inflammation is you're first going to have some type of injury. And I'm like, in here you've got a broken blood vessel, you got some bacteria that now are in the body, and I'm like, you're starting to release various types of chemicals in the area. Now we're going to start to have some reaction to this damage and some of this initial things that have happened. Other blood vessels are going to dilate. Again, this is where some of that inflammation is going to happen. You're going to have increased blood flow, increased vascular permeability, and increased leakage of fluid out of the blood vessels themselves. Now, this all is there to get white blood cells, to get chemicals to where they need to get to fast. Now, because some of that leaking of tissue, this is where we start to get development of some of the fluid. You're collecting fluid. You're collecting different types of white blood cells that are there because you've got these phagocytes. You can see this one eating. You can see this one eating there. You've got more white blood cells. That's what pus is. It's this interstitial fluid with a whole bunch of white blood cells, and usually with some type of foreign invader as well. And then eventually, once the body gets rid of the foreign invader, the bacteria in this case, I'm like, your cells will start to go away. You start to have healing happening. The blood vessels seals itself back up, but it's all there. And I'm like, if there's inflammation, if you've ever had a cut and you see something inflamed, this is what's happening right, in there. You've got blood vessels that are dilated, and you've got white blood cells that are, responding to the foreign invader. Inflammation is because you have a foreign invader in the body. Now, things that can cause inflammation. Lots of things. Lots of things can cause foreign inflammation in the body. And I'm like, and there's lots of things that happen. So whether you have some type of trauma, infection, foreign particle cancer, some type of damage, necrosis to some type of tissue, there's lots of things that can cause inflammation. And I'm like, but there's lots of things that are happening. And these are all things to try to protect your body, to get rid of the foreign invader, or to try to get your body back to normal. You've got the vasodilation, you're stimulating nerves, you may have vasoconstriction somewhere else, you're going to have some of that, the edema, the fluid everywhere. Oh my God, I don't want to go through all of these, but you're going to have more phagocytes getting released. You might have other types of chemicals or proteins, platelet activators. I'm going to say lots of different types of substances, anything that's going to try to help the body recognize, get rid of, and cure the body to get it back to normal. Now, another process of our immune system that's usually accompanied with inflammation, not always, is fever. Now, a fever is just anything that brings your body above its 98.6 Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius body temperature is a fever. Things that initiate fevers are called pyrogens. Now I like to break apart words. The first part of pyrogen is pyro. Now most people, when they think of pyro, think of fire. A pyromaniac is someone that likes fire. Well, pyro means heat, which is why it's associated with fire. Anything gen is because it generates. It's going to make. So a pyrogen is anything that makes heat. So it's anything that increases the body temperature. It heats it up. And so these are different things that just tell the hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain that controls body temperature, that the body temperature needs to increase. And everyone always thinks fever is really bad. Well, if it is high enough, it can cause damage to the body. But there's a reason why our body does initiate a fever. There are some benefits to having a fever. One, as your body temperature goes up, it can inhibit bacteria. Bacteria grow best. Most of the ones that infect us grow best at 37 degrees Celsius, our body temperature. Well, if you have a fever, they're not going to grow quite as well. It might not stop growth, but it might inhibit it enough that by inhibiting bacterial growth and your working immune system, you can get rid of something a whole lot faster. It can impede the nutrition of bacteria. A fever can reduce the available iron. And bacteria, for them to reproduce, especially at their maximum number, they do need iron. Well, fever can reduce iron available to them. So again, they're not going to be able to reproduce as well. It can also increase metabolism. It can speed up chemical processes in the body. It can stimulate immune system reactions and other protective processes. So if you have a slight fever, I know a lot of times it's, oh, well, I have a slight fever, I'm just going to take some type of over-the-counter anti-fever medicine. But then you're losing these benefits. So it's one of those, if you have a slight fever, and I'm like, maybe you want to stay away from those over-the-counter medicines so that that fever can actually do its job. You might actually get healthier a little bit sooner. Now, obviously, if you have an extreme fever, 105, I'm like, yes, you might need it, I'm like, just to function. But there's a reason why fevers are good for the body. Now, another big process, a part of our second line of defense, is phagocytosis. It's cell eating. It's trying to get rid of that foreign object. And so phagocytes, which means cells that eat, their job is to constantly be looking for any foreign invader and ingest them, get rid of them, and then for some of them to try to get some immunological information, some memory if they can, so that they remember how to handle them the next time. Now, there are major categories of phagocytes. So these are all cells that can eat. The top two the top two eating cells, neutrophils, this first one, and macrophages. I mean, their name has phage in it. They're big eating cells. I'm like, eosinophils, again, they're really looking at parasites and fungus, and a lot of times they're triggered by antigen-antibody reactions. But neutrophils and macrophages, they like to eat. They like to be able to get wherever that infection is and try to eliminate it as soon as possible. Now, to try to recognize foreign invaders, again, they're big eating cells. They like to eat, but we got to make sure that they eat foreign objects and not normal cells. A lot of these macrophages on their outside have something called a toll-like receptor. It's on the outside. These little receptors are there to try to recognize foreign objects. So this is recognizing a foreign object, a foreign molecule, one of those pathogen-associated molecular patterns, PAMP. It's something that this particular microbe has that targets it as a microbe, a foreign object. Maybe it's the NAMs and NEGs of peptidoglycan, the cell wall. Maybe it's some type of flagella, but it's got some type of structure that this white blood cell with its toll-like receptor can recognize as a foreign object, and it will trigger this white blood cell, and I'm like, to secrete various types of chemicals and then eventually eat it. But the white blood cell, other than wanting to eat it, it also wants to trigger, it wants to kind of alert the body, hey, there is something foreign in the body, I might need some assistance. It's not just me eating, because generally there's never just one thing that gets in. So kind of the phagocytosis process, the first part you have is chemotaxis of your phagocytes. So this big huge blob is our eating cell, our phagocyte. Chemotaxis is there are chemicals that are given off. A lot of times it's damage to tissue. If you did get a cut, that you're going to have chemicals being released, and that's going to trigger phagocytes to a specific area. Again, where you might potentially have some type of foreign invader, bacteria that got in. Then they're gonna have to stick. I'm like, so they're gonna attach, and that could be the attachment toll-like receptor to foreign molecule, but there are receptors on there. So we're gonna have the attachment, then we're gonna ingest it. And so they are gonna go around, it kind of puts these little extensions up to wrap itself around that foreign object and bring it in. So it eats it. Then you're going to have a lysosome whose job is, it's got digestive enzymes. It's going to fuse with this little vesicle that has our foreign object in it, and that digestive enzyme is going to break apart the bacteria, and I'm like, it's going to kill it, and then you're going to eliminate any of the particles from it. We got rid of it, and it's going to keep doing it. One phagocyte does not just eat one microbe. It can eat multiple microbes. It's a killing machine. But I did find this little thing on here. I thought it was kind of funny. The phagocytosis, the hug of death, because it looks like it's going up there and it's just going to give it a little hug, and then it kills it. Now this is showing how you can have dendritic cells with those long extensions going out, recognizing, bringing it in, because they are macrophages, and yes, target it for destruction. Interferons are used. Usually interferons, these are proteins made by certain white blood cells and various tissue cells. Now we usually abbreviate it to the IFN, but they are proteins made, and we usually see these made when there is a virus infection. So this is not bacterial infection, this is virus infection. And it's there to inhibit viral replication. So the virus can't replicate and go infect new cells. It also is going to trigger some more white blood cell action. Again, there's a foreign invader in the body, and it's going to try to recruit as many white blood cells as possible. So how the interferon works. So we're going to have two cells next to each other. These are your cells. The first cell gets a virus infection. So the virus got in, and I'm like, however, we do have genes in our cells for interferons. And when that virus gets in there, it triggers that gene. And this particular cell is now going to make interferon. That interferon will leave this infected cell and tell the neighboring cells, there are viruses around. You should probably arm yourself. You should probably do something about it. And it does. That this neighboring cell now starts to make antiviral proteins. The unfortunate part is the first infected cell is going to die. But before it died, it sent out that message to neighboring cells that there is a virus around. So these interferons, these are proteins that, save neighboring cells by telling the neighboring cells to arm themselves with those antiviral proteins. I found this picture somewhere else too that I liked. Again, two neighboring cells. The virus gets into this cell, activates that interferon. The first infected cell starts to make that interferon, kind of just like the little red triangles. It tells that neighboring cell that there's viruses around because of that interferon. This neighboring cell then makes antiviral proteins. It blocks viral replication because it can't get in the cell, which means it can't replicate. And you can really slow, if not stop, viruses from replicating with these interferons. Now, complements, these are a whole bunch of different types of blood proteins. They work together. Their job is to destroy bacteria. Their job is to destroy viruses. They're activated usually through a reaction pathway. And there are 3 different pathways to activate them. Now, there are lots of different types of complement proteins. They usually get names like C3b12, C5, the C for complement. But there's different ways we can activate it. There's a classical, alternative, and a lectin pathway. I don't care that you know which of the 3 pathways. I really care that you know the end result. What do these complement proteins do? Well, they are going to be triggering something known as opsonization, and I'm like, that's antibody-antigen reaction. They're going to trigger a lot of inflammation, and ultimately, they're going to target membrane attack and cell lysis of the foreign invader. They're there. It's inflammation and cell death of the infected cells. So their job, they're proteins that are going to inflammation and cell death. So, they help. And my last concept check on here, which of the following defenses is most likely to be active during a viral infection? Oops. And I'm like, it's the interferon. Again, the interferons are there to inhibit virus replication. They can also trigger white blood cell action as well. So, next PowerPoint, we're going to get into Chapter 15, our 3rd line of defense, talking about the different types of lymphocytes, your T cells and B cells, and how they can recognize those very specific invaders in the body and how they can tackle them in a very specific way and form memory cells because of it.